Okay. So, thank you very much, Kohai, for inviting me to talk about climate psychology and the Climate Psychology Alliance. And I'll just introduce myself very briefly. As I just said, I'm a psychotherapist. I had a psychiatric background, and I've been involved with climate psychology now for well over 10 years. And I came to it through eco-psychology, which is a broader study. Can you let Azumi in? Thank you. And in the UK, there has been an eco-psychology movement for maybe 30 years. Oh, where's they gone?
Okay.
Do you want me to? Yeah. Welcome, Azumi. Hello. I'm just talking about climate psychology and the Climate Psychology Alliance. So the Climate Psychology Alliance has been officially active for 10 years, but for 2 to 3 years before that, we were planning this organization. And it arose from some psychotherapists who became very interested in climate change and realized that the skills we have in psychology and psychotherapy are very, very relevant for the climate crisis, as well as the skills of activism and the skills of science, that we need that psychological piece. And so we are interested in many psychological aspects of climate change. The whole area of why it is difficult for people to grasp the climate crisis. And so in very short, I'll say this very shortly, that we're very built as human beings to respond to emergencies that are in front of us, that are caused by somebody else, and that we can do something about. You know, if we see a car coming and a child is running across the road, our whole being will rush to rescue that child. We can go into fight, flight. And one of the problems for us, particularly in developed countries, is that climate change is far away. It's not caused by somebody else. We're all implicit in it in terms of our industrial societies. And it's hard to see what to do about it. And it's also happening to people far away. Of course, that's not true, but we can make that up, that it's happening far away. We also think in the Climate Psychology Alliance that part of the problem, particularly in the West, for thinking about climate change is because of our history of colonialism and exploitation. In the States in particular, the history and background of slavery, which means that we don't take seriously what is happening to people of color. And yet the reality is that climate change is impacting poorer nations and impacting people of color more than white people. And so there is an inbuilt racism which doesn't help us get hold of the problem. And I'm simplifying everything I'm saying. So we look at denial. We also look at denialism, which is where there is a manufactured denial, where in fact organizations and individuals really do know that climate change is happening, but do their best to convince us that it's not happening. And we see this in the fossil fuel companies and the work they have done to discredit climate scientists. And we also look at that whole area of disavowal, where we know something is happening, but we distort something in our minds so that we don't see it or we avoid it. When the Climate Psychology Alliance started, we maybe were just a dozen people, and we got together and we held some conferences. And over time, we built up a stronger network. We set up a website where people can write things and explore ideas. And on our website, the things I would recommend most of all are podcasts, which are very engaging, and also the Handbook of Climate Psychology, which is some very brief articles summarizing. We also have a Wikipedia entry, which is quite academic. And then if I want to talk about the kinds of things jumping 10 years ahead that we're doing now, so that you have a sense of what we're offering. One of the things we offer is a methodology called climate cafes. And the version of Climate Cafe we use is that it's a safe space. Often, before COVID, we would actually meet in a real cafe, a quiet room in a real cafe, or in a quiet room in a pub. A bar would be. In Britain, some pubs have quiet rooms, and it's not like a noisy bar. But it would be a hospitable place where people would literally, have their coffee or their tea, maybe some cake. But the important thing for us about a climate cafe is we're not in that space talking about activism. It's not. We do think action is important, and we think that strategies to solve climate change are, of course, important. But we feel that people need a space to explore their feelings. And so in a typical climate cafe, we call it an action-free zone. Nobody is saying, oh, well, what I think we should do is we should stop driving, we should this, we should that. It's about how some people are feeling sad, some people are feeling angry, some people are feeling hopeless, some people are feeling very anxious. And it's a space where all the feelings can be heard and held. It's also very, it's not like a therapy group. So in most places where climate cafes are held, they might be held once a month. And sometimes somebody might just come on for one occasion. Other people might come every month. It's very informal. You don't have to sign up. But the job of the facilitator is to create that space where people can explore their feelings safely. And so we run those. We also train therapists and other people who are psychologically available to do this, to run climate cafes. So that's one of the things we do. And we feel that it's a very important tool to be able to create spaces in ordinary communities to help or to contribute to the resilience in ordinary communities, because we understand that we're going to need resilient communities in all sorts of ways. And there are many different ways of creating resilience, both physical and psychological resilience. We also run a regular workshop for therapists and clinical psychologists, not only those, called Through the Door. And there was a Jungian therapist called James Hillman who talked about the fact therapists had to get out of the consulting room. They had to go through the door of their consulting room. And so it's a one-day workshop, sometimes with some follow-up, where therapists can come and talk about the dilemma of, I want to do some things with climate change. What can I do? Can you support me? Where they can explore their own feelings about climate change in order to be able to be available, maybe to run a climate cafe, or maybe to run some forest bathing. You have that I know, in Japan, but with a psychological input, or maybe to work with their local environmental group. So to move away from the client therapist in the consulting room model into the wider community. So we run that as a regular monthly event. We also have a list of practitioners who will offer sessions for activists who are becoming overwhelmed with their feelings. We call that therapeutic support. It's possible to have 3 free sessions, but then maybe go on for longer if necessary. And we've been doing that for 2 years now. Originally, it was for XR activists, but we reach much more widely than that. We're also doing a lot of work supporting youth activists. And I hope to hear from you later what the youth activist movement is like in Japan. And we have also, one of our members has just done some groundbreaking research on interviewing 10,000, actually not interviews, surveys of 10,000 children and young people in 10 different countries. And this research, which has just come out and will be published shortly in The Lancet, what it shows for the first time is how the mental health of young people is impacted by government inaction. So not only are young people feeling anxious and worried about their future, but that is made worse because they also feel betrayed by governments not acting. And this is very important research. And we hope that it can help some of the court cases that are being brought by groups of young people all over the world. In the States, there is the case of Juliana. You might have heard of that. But also in Europe, there are some children from Portugal who are bringing a case against 33 European countries to get them to act on climate change. And so we hope this research will be helpful. And we are very pleased that there is, after a week after the research was launched, it was quoted in the UN General Assembly by the UN Secretary General Guterres. And so we're aiming to, we need the psychology and the psychology research to help the lawyers make the case for that part of climate activism, which is to use the law, as has been successful in some countries, to reduce emissions. And many of our members write about climate change. And I will send to Kohai 2 links because in the run-up to COP, the British Psychological Society has published an edition about climate change. And also, one of our largest counseling organizations has published an edition about climate change. And the articles are very clear. And so I think they could be a very good resource for you. Let me stop and see if there's any questions, and then perhaps I'll talk more about climate emotions and the mental health impacts of climate change.
Yes, I have a question.
Mickey.
Yeah, the article which is going to be published in the Lancet, is that the government action on climate issues or any issues?
It's about climate issues.
Climate issues.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's about climate change, how young people feel about climate change, and how governments not acting makes them feel worse because they feel more hopeless. And also, many of the young people felt that they were not being taken seriously. So when they talked about how they felt, adults would tell them to shut up or dismiss what they were saying, not take them seriously. And that's very cruel. We might say that was emotional abuse.
I just thought that not only climate issues, but all other issues that what the government policies and action might affect.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, Hiroki.
About the relationship between psychology, psychotherapy, and climate change. You mentioned that climate change is far away and implicit, and also history of colonialism and exploitation or denialism. That means if no such obstacles are there, people should be aware of the possibility of climate change. So in order to induce the awareness, then psychotherapeutic techniques might be used to evoke that awareness. But on the other hand, in the later part of your explanation, you mentioned that many young people are pretty much aware of the ongoing climate change, but they got really frustrated by the inaction of the government.
Yes.
So on that part, you are doing a lot of research showing that many of these young people are so frustrated and having existential fears. So that was a part of the tool to make people aware, make older generation people aware of the existence of.
Well, you see, I think Greta's work has been very important, Greta Thunberg. I think it's really important to say she is not alone. There are many young people all over the world who have actually been as brave as Greta, some coming from indigenous communities, talking to at the UN but there have been these real youth leaders arising, which is quite remarkable. And of course, they understand the science. Greta is very well informed on the science from one of the best climate institutes in Sweden. She gets her information from the best places. And I think for young people, they're able to see that, you see, if I make it personal, I have had my life. It is very likely, I'm nearly 70, it's very likely that I will see more climate disasters, but I have had, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, I have had a life and a career and family and now grandchildren. And for young people, they see that their prospects are worse than that of their parents. And for some people, for example, children in island communities can see rising sea levels actually taking away their livelihood as we speak. You know, so some of these children are at the front line, children, young people, they see it. Others, like Greta, have read the science, and of course her protest became contagious. Also, and actually just to say, in Europe, there are many organizations who join Greta. So we have some groups that are like Climate Psychology Alliance in Germany and Sweden called Sci for the Future, Sci for Future, which is, of course, like the children's climate strikes for future. They use that. And there are also scientists for the future. I think we have seen a shift in the last 5 years of more awareness of climate change. Up till about 4 years ago, when our BBC had interviews about climate change, they would have one climate scientist and one climate denier, as if it was 50-50. And they've stopped doing that. And also, the protest organization XR has raised the profile of climate change. And I think more people understand there's a problem. Where we see the denial, and I don't know if it's true in Japan or, but it certainly is, many of the people who have denied anthropogenic global warming now are saying, okay, we accept global warming, but what they argue about is how fast we need to act. You know, and that's where the disavowal of the urgency comes in. Yeah.
So you have basically two aims: making people becoming aware of the existence of climate change, but at the same time, you know, politically mobilizing people, and society and country to do something about it right now.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, that is the most urgent thing. I'm just posting in the chat the name of an organization called Climate Outreach. And we have also done some work with them. And their focus is climate communication. And they talk about how to communicate with the center-right about climate change. How do you communicate with religious communities about climate change? Because that's another pressure group. And the person who founded Climate Outreach is called George Marshall. And you can find YouTube videos. He wrote a very important book about 7 or 8 years ago called Don't Even Think About It: Why Our Brains Are Wired to Ignore Climate Change. But his motivation is that unless we get the center-right involved, unless we get religious groups involved, it has to stop being a political issue. It has to stop being only the left wing are interested. It has to be, so he's very interested in how you communicate and draw all the communities in. And I think personally, I'm not very hopeful about COP, but actually the rhetoric has changed. Our current Prime Minister was a climate skeptic 7 or 8 years ago, but he I don't want to talk too politics, but his statements today are very different, you know. I want to talk just very briefly to give you a summary about the ways that climate change can impact mental health. And I'm using that term not just mental health illnesses, but our psychological state. I'm using it broadly. Now, I'm saying this in the context that climate change is an overall health problem. It creates health issues for many people. There will be parts of Africa that have never had malaria, and because the temperatures have gone up, malaria mosquitoes will be higher up the mountains than they were. There will be issues of food shortage, of drought, etc. There will be other infectious illnesses that are more common because of vectors, mosquitoes being more common, all sorts of things. Within that, we have the mental health and psychological impacts of climate change. And the first one that many people don't know about is the impact of rising temperatures on mental health. And so in every place where they have done research, when temperatures go above what the person is used to in their environment, you get increased violence, increased suicide, you get increased psychiatric admissions. And sometimes those are of very vulnerable people. So people, for example, with Alzheimer's or schizophrenia, may not take appropriate precautions to stay in the shade or to drink plenty of water, and so they end up being very ill. So it's really important that we understand that rising temperatures on their own have a direct impact on our mental health. The second thing is the traumatic effects of climate change. And we can split these into two. And one is the sudden impact of climate disaster, climate-related disasters like forest fires, like people having to leave their homes because of floods or fire or all those kind of things, those sudden emergencies. There are what we have even in the UK, and I think probably in Japan as well, is that there are some areas of the UK that have had several floods. People's homes have been flooded more than once. They can't get any insurance anymore. Maybe their small business, they can't get insurance for their business. So, and the impact of that is increased rates of depression. And then, and I've sort of merged into talking about those gradual impacts of climate-related disaster, which is where, for example, farming groups have droughts year on year, and so that their business as a farmer is badly affected, and they may not be able to farm anymore. And there's some very good research in Australia on the impact on mental health of climate change-related droughts. And of course, what I want to emphasize is that many of these research studies, what they show is that people with what we call comorbidities, the most vulnerable, are most affected. So the people who already have some physical problems, or maybe they've had some bereavements, or maybe they have other mental health issues, then when they have to live through a climate change disaster or a series of disasters, they are more affected. And of course, that also means poorer people are more affected as well, because they may have less resilient structures, not always. And of course, then, and it's important to mention the impact of forced migration. And there are communities, even in the UK, which are having to move. And you'll be very well aware of how many major cities in the world are at sea level. And so this is an issue, but it's already happening. People having to migrate, often internally within their country, not always externally, but in order to move to a place where they can grow food better or they can get jobs, because it's not possible to exist. And I want to talk about those before I then talk about climate anxiety or eco-anxiety, because that is another issue, which is what we the impact on us of knowing that climate change is happening, not necessarily to us, but it is happening, and it's going to get worse, and that it is going to impact on the whether parts of the world are habitable, which is true. Because going back to rising temperatures, as you're all aware, in some of our cities this summer, the city mayors had to put in water fountains, so they had to put in cooling places, where people could go. And if they didn't do that, we die. You know, if it's too hot, we die, and animals die, human beings die. We can't maintain our life if it gets too hot. And this happens in some cities in India, for example, and also you know, in many other places where there have been very, very high temperatures, is a threat to life. But coming back to climate anxiety, it's important that anxiety is just a shorthand. When we say climate anxiety, we mean a whole range of emotions: grief, fear, anxiety, despair, anger. And it's really important to acknowledge that these emotions are very normal. We don't, when we talk about grief, we don't say somebody is ill because they're grieving when they have a friend die or a family member die. And we like to think about that those people who have eco-anxiety actually have some kind of empathy. They care because they feel, because they care. They're having climate feelings because they care. And sometimes people need support. They need support with these overwhelming feelings, which is why we run structures like climate cafes. But it's very, very important that this is not seen as pathological. And I'm very delighted that in the UK, the Royal College of Psychiatrists, which is our, you must have equivalent organizations in Japan, which are the regulating bodies for different branches of medicine, the Royal College of Psychiatrists has put up some statements and fact sheets for young people and for parents and teachers about young people's eco-anxiety, made it very clear this is normal. And how can we support young people with this? So it's really important that this medical body is not pathologizing climate feelings. Now, very, very occasionally, and this doesn't happen very often, we do see some people who need specialist professional help. And we sometimes see this with children who have severe autism becoming very, very affected by climate change because they're thinking in a very literal way and they really don't understand why it's not happening, and they need specialist help. I have occasionally come across, these are very rare cases, where an adult is so overwhelmed by the thought of climate change that they feel the only thing they can do is kill themselves and their children or something. I mean, that's very, very rare. But it's very important that psychological professionals are aware that very occasionally vulnerable people will be overwhelmed by the impact of this. I think we saw it when Russia and the United States were building up nuclear arms, and people would feel, what's the point? You know, we're going to have Armageddon, you know. And occasionally you would find one or two people who joined a suicide cult, or, you know, that sort of thing. But this is very rare, very, very rare. But it's important that as professionals we can be aware of that. So one of the phrases that a colleague of mine has developed is called the biodiversity of emotions. So if we get stuck in just feeling angry about the environmental and climate change crisis, if we just get stuck in our grief, what we have to do is allow ourselves to feel the range of emotions, to feel our sadness, to feel our grief, to feel our anxiety. To do that in community, which might be like a climate cafe, or it might be talking to friends informally, and then move on to find, we have a phrase in English about, where am I going to put my shoulder to the wheel? Where am I going to push? We have to find our way. What's our single way of pushing? You know, where do we need? I think that's probably all I want to say, and then move on to questions. But just Hiroki, because you work in social science, I also want to say that we have several people in our organization who work across the whole area of what they call psychosocial research. And one of our founders, Professor Paul Hoggett, was involved in psychosocial research. So we take very seriously that interface between sociology and psychology and the psychosocial. And so now let's have some more questions. And Kohai, if you have any things, because you and I have had several conversations, so you know it would be good to if you want to pick me up on something that we've talked about informally.
It's so difficult. Maybe all of the participants now today, you know, the situation in Japan, and now getting your explanation, they have some ideas in their mind. So not from me, but I just want to really know the participants' ideas or thinking thoughts right now. Yeah, I communicated with you, and you know my ideas already.
Yeah,
so,
that's good. Actually, one of the things I'd like to do is actually hear from Aya and Azumi, just to hear a little bit about what you're doing. Because I
yes,
heard from
I'm doing coaching, and then my mission nowadays is creating sustainable leader. So I'm concerned about a lot of climate change. I want to create people who is very sustainable self, and also do action against, very conscious about climate change and social program, but also do some actions to settle those kind of problem. So that's the people that I want to make. And then by hearing what you have shared with us, you mentioned that the young people, many young people are frustrated for the non-action of government side. But in case of Japan, I wonder what's the level of young people's frustration at this moment in Japan, because our government is nothing like, it just election finished yesterday of parliament member.
Yes.
But it's no party was really mentioning about what they need to do for the climate change. Of course, some party are mentioned at the end of their what they are saying. So actually, that I felt that it's kind of taboo, or like if they do say something they maybe assume that Japanese people are not interested in to talk about those kind of things that they are avoiding to talking about because it doesn't make the vote for them.
Yes.
So in this case, that for those like European young people because they got somehow the information about what government anyway is doing, even it's very low level. But so that's why they are very frustrated and so on. But in Japan case, it's that the information about what is going on about climate change, it's not really shared among young people. So they are not aware of the situation. They are not educated about to think about what they can do for this situation.
Is climate change taught in schools?
Well, they started to talking about SDGs study in the elementary school or 5th grade, but it's like it's just a teaching side. It's like what does it mean the 17 goals? So they're not connecting what they are really need to think about what they can do to decrease the advancement of the change, the crisis.
The education of SDGs now is not deeply rooted because one politician, very powerful politician in the leading party, Liberal Democratic Party, made a speech during this general election, and he said that global warming has a good side. It raised the temperature, so northern part of Japan can grow delicious rice. So he was heavily criticized, but the speech shows that he had never ever thought about the possibility to invoke the feeling, anxiety, and fear by portraying global warming as a good thing. So it shows the situation in Japan has not come up to the stage where people have anxieties and fears.
Azumi, where are you coming from?
I'm now in Aichi Prefecture in Nagoya. I'm a social activist, and I'm also the representative of the NPO 7 Generations in Japan that trains community leaders, community social action leaders. And we train people for the real workshop and an online training for the becoming a game changers in Japan. That's our that's our commitment, our organization's commitment, and also of course Kohei and Miki and Aya was kind of member of 7 Generations, I think. And and I have so many friends, youth activists, and they are so they're having anxiety. Do we have to have a children, or do I have to get married? And that's what they're really concerned. And also
I'm glad you mentioned that because we're hearing that everywhere.
So what I hear from you, we're having a climate cafe, just free talk that really works for them. We have some kind of gathering for use using non-violent communication methods, and they're having some youth climate cafe for the Fridays for Futures members, but that kind of things happening in Japan. But they are really serious.
That's great.
On the other hand, I have a kind of question that I started last year to learn the meditation from India organization. And then you mentioned that climate change is impacting to the people's feeling, emotions. But it is that other side, like people's emotion is affecting like climate change itself, because if people think very negatively, it is affecting like negative impact to the climate. It's like that, of course, climate change impacting people's feeling in a negative way, but it's other side, like the quality of thinking that may be impacting that creating like a bad side of climate change, or this kind of things are happening.
Yes, that's interesting. Yeah, I think that also I find it really interesting trying to think about what's realistic in terms of feelings. And that's why I was emphasizing how we need to move through a different range of feelings. We have to learn how to, because we're real and we're human, and what happens does cause feelings, of course. And we also have to find, we talk a lot actually in Climate Psychology Alliance about the right, what we call the right kind of hope. Not a hope that is unrealistic. We talk about what we call radical hope. There was a writer in Czechoslovakia who talked about hope as being something very ethical. And so we're not talking about, oh, everything's going to be fine, you know, all we have to do is think positively and everything will be all right. We're not talking about that kind of hope. Cristina Figueres, who was a very important figure from the UN in the Paris COP conference, talks about stubborn hope. She, you know, it's where you refuse to give up because it's the right thing to do, is to continue to work for social justice in this field, and to really make change where we can. So we refuse to give up hope. So it's like it's an ethical stance. It's not too dreamy, Go ahead.
Can I comment? Or Miki, you wanna go first? I saw you.
Kohei, you have a question? Okay. I just want to share with you about like our society, Japanese society, like in general, like Azumi said, certain group of youth group or some even adult, of course, care about climate, and then like we are doing some actions, but in general, like like most of people are don't have the sense of urgency or sense of crisis, even government. And I don't know, industrial areas, the companies, I don't know what kind of crisis they feel. I don't know, if they have their sense of urgency is not from climate, but then whole the business will change, right? Because of other country, the companies, other countries changing their game. So I think I think that the Japanese corporations are started doing something, but it's not not for climate change, climate crisis, but for the business transformation. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And then the other things I want to say is that like I think that the whole root is our education. We are not, our older education system is that we are not to be trained to be a critical. We don't learn the critical thinking. And then because Japan is okay, economy has been good and it's very safe comparing to many other countries. And then everybody thinks that all the society will take care of everything. Although they are not happy, they have many complaints about government. But then like our election yesterday, the percentage of the vote is only 55%. Yeah. Sometimes it's lower than 50. People don't go to voting, although they are unhappy and they are complaining so many things, but they think that one vote doesn't change anything. That kind of things is in the general Japanese. It's very different from the Europe. They always do the demonstration and then have the marching, and we are not like that in general.
No,
Some people do, of course. So I just want to share. So in that situation, that's why all the issues you mentioned about all the mental issues and then effects from the climate change is, I do understand, but then I would more like how to create the people aware of the climate change, this the state of urgency.
So and maybe this is a question to all of you, do you have other examples of where social change has happened and how that happened? I mean for us in Europe, it's how did women get the vote, for example? How did we move to a situation where although we still have a lot of racism and white privilege in this country, a hotel can't put up a sign, as it could when I was a child, that said no blacks, no Irish, and you would get a famous cricketer coming from the West Indies not being able to find a hotel to stay because, but society has changed, and also around sexuality. So the change that was made in our country where homosexuality was illegal and now it isn't. So what are your models of social change and how it works in Japan? How is it? Because I would look at those and think, okay, how can we turn climate change into one of those issues?
Well, can I say something? I think there's two ways that we're going to have a social change. One is the pressure from the the foreign countries, the outside countries, that the policies affect us, especially the United States policy affect us, our government. So that will change one way. But the second way is that it's happening from the local government. Like some local government said okay to the, I don't know how to say. 同性婚ってなんて言うんだっけ? How can I say that?
Same-sex marriage?
Same sexuality marriage. But they're said okay from the local government. Of course, not the whole government doesn't permit that, but so that was, I think there's a two-way for the social change in Japan. Yeah.
Okay. And can I ask, do you think Japan would get on board with climate change if, and I hope this doesn't happen, if there was a disaster that was related to climate change? As in the States, there have been the fires and...
It's a bit different, the social transformation that you are meaning, but it's definitively after the earthquake of Kobe in 1994, the people's cooperation in a volunteer basis, it's really changed. That before that, like working for volunteer, helping others without any paid money was not happening, but at the time that was really like everything was destroyed by the earthquake. And then that became like a social movement. And then after the hit of like the big earthquake on 2011.
With the tsunami.
Yeah, with tsunami.
Yeah.
That definitively this social like changes for a corporation.
Okay.
It's really happening. But this was really like extreme situation. So maybe this kind of very big destruction happens, then the Japanese mind changes. People are living near Japan. It's really like surrounded by the ocean, but not so many Japanese are aware of what is happening with the global warming and also what's happening with the ocean.
Yes.
Pollution, and yeah, as you said, that the sea level change.
Yeah.
So if something really big things happen, then it's easier for Japanese to change the mentality.
I think also I want to mention, because you've talked about small communities, that globally, many city leaders are getting together in relation to climate change. And of course, that represents a high proportion, because many people live in cities, you know, we have urban societies. And so the city mayors, they have a club of people who want to take action on climate change, and they can move more quickly than some of the governments, the national governments. And I don't know if there are some cities in Japan who might be involved. So that's not as small as local, but it's not as big as a nation acting.
Like in terms of climate policy, like a Tokyo government is setting very like advanced the combat policy to the climate change. Even before our former prime minister declare about carbon neutral by 2050. So, but and lower than like a Tokyo government, that is all the world or cities. And then what I want to share is that after our former prime minister declare about carbon neutral by 2050, our activists try to convince our local government to declare carbon neutral city by 2050. But then even after prime minister declared, they didn't want it. And then none of them tried to be the first mayor to declare it. So they are so conservative about it.
I'm going to say, what I'm hearing from you is something very conservative with small c, but also some complacency in society that everything is okay, and unless maybe there's a tsunami, but things are okay, and we don't need to go and vote. We don't need to. Yeah, so that makes it very hard for you guys who want to make some change. And
yeah, but what in the people's, oh, sorry.
Oh, I think one good example of social change in Japan is that when the sorting out of garbages started out in Japan, people thought that, oh, it's impossible. How can we do that? But it was very fast. The implementation process of garbage sorting out was done in Japanese society. Why? Because mutual surveillance system, the social pressure in the community worked. So this, social pressure in Japan plays a big role in imposing the patterns of behavior in a fixed way, but at the same time, it can be used to change the behavior at the local level. So it's not, from the top-down approach, but bottom-up approach, and sharing the same value in the community. Well, Azumi-san is nodding, like an audience in the rock festival.
Yeah.
So I think we need to use the existing mechanism of society in Japan for a better way to attract people, mobilizing people. And
that's interesting.
I guess Azumi-san is trying to do a lot in your workshop to get people involved in.
Yeah. So that's we aim for the community level action leaders. That's what we aim for, not only the government. For the government, just community leaders. That's what we aim for.
So
what I want to
you
share, I'm sorry.
Please.
I want to share is that like a positive side of the people's action is that like Aya-san said, like after like a big earthquake, year 2011, and even before that, the 10-year before, we have a big earthquake in Osaka area. And then around that time, people started doing a volunteer work. So now, like if we have any disaster, somewhat the people just go, many people go and helping those, the area. And I never done it, but then those people have a like job, but still many people started going, like that kind of volunteer work becoming more like it's not normal, but then many people started doing it. And also money, if anything happened in a disaster, lots of money goes there. The people donate. So that's the good part of the like a people's action, which I hardly do. So that's the kind of hope. But then because they see all the big earthquake or like floods, then they go and help to do something. But then climate change is a little bit, even though those floods are caused by climate change, and they may know or may not know about it, but so they do those like immediate action, but it's not necessarily a little bit future.
So they help with disaster, but they don't think wider politically to take their action into challenging.
I think so,
the cause. Okay. Yeah.
But I tend to bad about the Japanese people, but then I just recall that that part of the Japanese people's action is great,
So Kohai's just said that Tokyo and Yokohama are C40 member cities. So they'll have city leaders from many countries will be putting them under pressure. I also posted the name of another organization that I'm finding very helpful just with the science, and it's a new climate crisis advisory group. They have been doing some monthly public meetings to talk about what needs to happen. They're very much based on the science, but they also include a professor of psychology, Lorraine Whitmarsh, who has been researching behavioral responses. And so I'm just sharing that because I think it's a good source of information, and their meetings are very accessible. And they're available on YouTube. Sorry, I've made a typo there. So it's CCAG.
Oh yeah, CRAG.
Yeah, sorry. I typo there. It's the predictive text that's doing it. I did type.
Oh, I see.
Sorry. Yeah, CCAG. Okay. Any final? I think we're coming to the end of time. Kohai, is that So any final questions?
Can I just comment as a first and final
comment
and request for the further discussion
and thank
to our Japanese side of the group in the future, because we cannot start the discussion from now. Yep. I just watched the TV program analyzing yesterday's election, and then that thing after entire talk here today, I was still thinking the people, Japanese nationals here in Japan, living in this time, in this age, adults, or let me start first for the kids. They are mainly born and raised in a economic recession time from the beginning of their life. So it's kind of I do not know. But I was thinking apathic reaction, or mental reaction, or mental mode were continuing, possibly psychologically. I have no idea. That's one thing. And even adult, because thinking about the social movement, we cannot find out the big social movement track back to 70s, I suppose. And 70s, all countries, including Japan and UK and wherever, anti-war or anti-Vietnam or same. And 80s, we enjoyed our economic boom, but after then, how to overcome this kind of mood and more like looking back to UK's 70s, 60s due to the over social securities and economy got down, how you overcame. Otherwise, we are all activists or like intelligent, so we can analyze and we can comment, but we cannot pull all the people to the front. So that's my takeaway to think more, because we except Ichinose-san teaching in college, other four are partially activists. By the way, I forgot to mention, Aya is Japan's co-lead of Climate Coaching Alliance.
Okay.
So she's familiar with UK's climate coaching.
Okay. And yes, and Charlie's work. I was talking to Charlie last week. She is the founder of Climate Coaching Alliance. So yeah.
Right. So that's my thought today.
Yes.
From the beginning of the just I don't like to extend the meeting affecting to all of you. So
well, I'm very. It is quite extraordinary, isn't it, how with Zoom I can be having this conversation with you halfway across the world, and I really appreciate meeting with you. And if you want any of our members, other members, Rebecca could come and talk to you about climate cafes or some of the work. But I will send you a list of resources, Kohai, that you can share with the group, just some of the things I've mentioned. And they're just a taster, but there's obviously a lot more.
And we can reach you to Climate Psychology Alliance.
Yeah, indeed.
Website. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll end the meeting now, and thank you very much. Bye bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
very much.
Bye.
Yeah.